to be independent or not to be independent, to settle and buy a Rolex or not to settle and buy a Rolex. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. More about them later. And today's collection review is a great one. It's coming all the way in from Sweden. He's a Swedish watch collector living in Norway. His name is Andreas. And Andreas, if you're watching, happy, but today at the time I'm recording, it's a Monday. Happy Monday. I really enjoyed diving into Andreas's collection here, and I think that you're all going to really enjoy the journey along with me. We're going to learn a lot about what I think his collector future should be. We're off the back of a couple of great collection reviews, and here's another one. Order of events. One, we're going to walk through all of the watches he has in his collection. I'm going to give you my thoughts on each of them historically and for their material merit as well. Some interesting watch tidbits that I can share with you. Then we're going to go into Andreas's answers to my questions. If you're going to submit a collection review to us here at Theo and Harris, you have to answer a couple of questions that give me the information that I need to then, inform my decision making, right? This is essentially a consulting service. I'm just doing it for free, obviously, but I'm really trying to not just tell you watches that I like and give you education. I really want it to be relevant to you guys. I want it to be relevant, and I want you to see my thought process as someone that's been in watch collecting for a little over a decade now. So we're going to analyze those answers, and then finally I'm going to give you really my takeaways. Finally, I'm going to tell you what I think you, meaning Andreas, should be seriously considering next. And sneak peek to the answer here, two roads are about to diverge into a wood, and Andreas, sneak peek, I might recommend you take the one less traveled, but let's find out a little bit later. First watch here. It's a great Omega. It's a Mark 40 from 1996. The first thought I have about this watch is that 1996 was actually the year, I believe, that Omega's Mark 40 was introduced. And I find that to be a really interesting, watch fact, because if you think about it, late 90s, what was happening in the world of luxury watchmaking in the late 90s? Okay, you've got Omega introducing a complicated but now smaller, more compact Speedmaster, which was on a price level, right? They were kind of democratizing and expanding the collection on the Speedmasters. On the other side, right, not that far away from Switzerland, we had the rebirth, right, of Lange & So in this not very large industry, by the way, right? There aren't that many players in this industry. You essentially have a couple of very important independents, and you've got two big groups or three big groups counting LVMH. That's it, right? This is a pretty close-knit community, and there was a lot happening, right? You have Lange gunning for Patek, right? Lange at the time in 1996, just having been reintroduced, right? Just having had their debut. Also, we would imagine, we could probably find out from patents and applications, but we would imagine they were already in the development of what would be the datograph, right? Which was the first in-house integrated chronograph from any major brand in decades. Lange was about to, in many ways, dethrone Patek or give Patek a real run for their money so far as who deserves the crown. Kind of funny that's happening at the same time, right? Omega was thinking in a very different way than the boys over in Germany. So that's just where I was going. I also think, of course, of James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, right? I think of Hodinkee, right? The Omega Mark 40 was the watch that Hodinkee founder Ben Clymer, I believe, was given, or if not, then he inherited later on. But it was the watch he remembered his grandfather having. Right. So all of us know, or many of us know and share that sort of sentiment. Right. And I know that Hodinkee has given the Mark 40 quite a bit of popularity and credit, and it's no secret why. It's very obvious why. It's such a beautiful watch. It's complicated. The proportions are great. The watches are a little bit easier for wrists that are a little bit more modestly sized. By the way, I'm wearing my Cartier Tank Normal, which is a watch that is certainly built for a little bit more of a modest wrist. Anyway, the Mark 40 has become a cult classic. The Mark 40 has become something that everyone kind of appreciates. They're fun. They're fun Speedmasters in an approachable size. You can't really beat that too much, right? The next watch that we go on to talk about here is another Omega, This one is CK859. I remember when this watch was released. I've told this story many times. I was actually at Omega Days, which is Omega's launch party. This is probably 3 years ago now. They released this watch at the same time that they released the Moonshine Gold, yellow gold Speedmasters with the black subdials also on a rubber strap. They did that at the same time they did this watch. This watch was way more under the radar, though. It got virtually no attention. People didn't even really know it existed. It was kind of a funny and weird release strategy because it's such a beautiful watch. You say, wow, this is such a headliner. Why isn't it getting any attention? And maybe, just maybe, that's because of my own bias, right? Maybe as a vintage watch lover, I couldn't help but to think that my taste was the center of the world, right? And say, why isn't everyone talking about this? It's a 1940s Omega, homage, but brought to 39 millimeters with a brand new movement, and everything about the watch is perfectly proportioned, and it's perfect. Why isn't everyone talking about it? Is everyone insane? Of course, a little bit more of a complicated story than that, right? I believe they were limited. I believe they may have been limited. But even more than that, it was just a quieter launch, and that makes sense, right? Most people in the world are not looking for a, item that literally looks like it came from the 40s. That's, it's a little bit, it's not as common as we think in the vintage watch community, right? Most people want things that look new and things that are of today, right? They want cashmere sweatpants. They don't want no makeup from the 40s, right? Our tastes are unusual, and that's what brings our community a little bit closer, our shared appreciation for this funny taste, right? So the next conversation here, the next piece as a matter of conversation, is the Rolex Explorer 114270. Fantastic watch. The run was from 2001 to 2010. I sold a ton of these watches back in the day, building Theo and Harris as a retail store. I would, buy them all the time. I would talk about them on YouTube. We did a series called In the Metal, where one of the big selling points of this watch is just that it was priced so appropriately. At the time, you could get them between, $48 and $5,500 oftentimes. Now they've crept up a little bit, of course, with all modern Rolex, but they're just great, no frills watches. I adore them. Obviously, this is the last reference, I believe, before they went up in size, to the super or, super case or whatever it may be. So it has a very small, almost dainty appeal. Of course, this is a Rolex Explorer. So it's, going back, or it's a grandson of one of the great Rolex stories, right? Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbing to the summit of Mount Everest in 1953. Of course, a Rolex wasn't the only watch that was, a relied upon timekeeper on that trip. There was also a Smiths, another brand that people don't talk about. I believe that's a British brand, if I'm correct. But it's just a testament to Rolex's marketing savvy. Two brands made it to the top of Mount Everest, but only one lived to tell the story, essentially, right? They both made it home, but only one brand new to capitalize. Only one brand knew that this was a multi-billion-dollar opportunity of storytelling. It's really amazing. I mean, Rolex's ads about the Explorer from that point on. I mean, I'll tell you, just about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I was actually having a cup of coffee at the in northern Italy, and I was at the foothills, essentially, of the Matterhorn, and there was an old Rolex ad of a Rolex Explorer with a man's hand just holding on to rock, essentially, with the Rolex Explorer on it, and it said something to the effect of, if you were climbing the Matterhorn tomorrow, right, you'd be wearing a Rolex. And it's such an effective piece of marketing. I mean, the visual was so obvious, but textural and almost like energetic. There was so much energy and life packed into that photo. Anyway, Rolex Explorer is a classic. Come on, it doesn't really get much more simple or boring, but in that simplicity, there is a lot of truth and beauty and reliability. There's a great story. Next, even a cooler Rolex Explorer. It's tough to have them both, but this is a 1016 from 1975. This was, I believe, the third or fourth reference of the Explorer, but it was the Explorer that really ran for far longer. This was the Explorer that I think that it wasn't an experimental Explorer. It wasn't an early beta test Explorer. It was the Explorer, really. Obviously, fabulous watch, matte dial. This has so much character that you don't really get in modern watches. It's pretty much fabulous. And the last watch here in your collection there, Andreas, is this Habring² Felix Chronograph top seconds. This is a fascinating watch we're going to talk about a lot more later. But Habring is a great company. This is a beautiful watch, a lot of texture on its dial. The sizing is great. It's very modern. And then, the strap, everything about this watch is very pretty. But then it's really the story, I think, and the spirit of independent watchmaking that we'll talk about later that makes it really special, right? This is a husband and wife team that makes only 50 watches a year and has become, I think a real cultural player in independent watchmaking, right? In large part because of their friendly relationship with Ben Clymer of Hodinkee. Habring was really early. It was an independent brand that gained a lot of early credit and I think in some ways paved the way for other independents. Habring²'s success was evidence that there is a viable industry here. It definitely predates a lot of the independent brands that we know today. So big fan. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. I have been a Squarespace customer, loyal customer, and brand partner now. I mean, a customer for 10 years. I don't know where I'd be without them. There's nothing about Squarespace that hasn't grown. There's nothing about Squarespace that isn't a perfect partner, digitally speaking. I don't just recommend Squarespace to all of you out there if you're looking to start a new website and reserve a domain and start to build out your public portfolio. I recommend it to everyone out there that already has their website, maybe is even happy. But if you go on over to Squarespace, make an account, take a look at the tools, the partnership, the support that Squarespace offers, not only from their templates and their ability to customize and their ease of use and their design, but also all of their business tools, right? From SEO tools, billing tools, invoicing tools, customer support tools, the fluid engine system that allows you as the owner to really operate, drag and drop your site as you see fit. Squarespace has empowered me, again, for 10 years now to grow my business. And I don't regret a day of it. I couldn't recommend them more. Head on over to squarespace.com, use code TheoHarris, and save 10% off of your first website or domain. Go become a member of the Squarespace family. Couldn't recommend it more. Let's get into Andreas. I'm going to read you what he sent me, both his preamble, his introduction, and then into the question and answer. So let's do it. I'm 43, Swedish collector living in Norway, white-collar professional. For the past 10 years, I've worked as a manager leading different teams, strategy, development, etc., in a large insurance company. I'm now leading IT in a municipality. Rather active person, enjoys snowboarding, split boarding, active football player. As a collector, I tend to go for classic tool watches, hence my Explorer heavy collection. But I've cycled through different brands such as Panerai, a Bruce Wayne Rolex GMT, 2 different Mings, and a couple of other ones. Very good introduction, tells me a lot about who he is as a collector, right? Sometimes I need people to really smack me in the face and remind me that they are active people. It's so dissimilar life from mine that I forget that people do it, God bless, of course. But I've never reached for a watch because it would fit my active lifestyle. That's just never something that's even occurred to me. So I had needed to be reminded there, and he did a couple of times. But we learn a little bit more about Andreas here and his trajectory and ultimately my recommendation in this Q&A portion, right? So the first question I hit you all with when I ask you to submit collections for reviews is, what's the watch that doesn't get as much wear as it should? And why do you think? His answer: the CK859, the Omega, doesn't get too much wear, mostly because I cycle between the Rolex Explorer 114270 and the Habring. Somehow the CK859 does feel misplaced. I really don't know. Maybe it's my current work environment. I do like these sector dials. Anyway, maybe it's just a little bit too big for my 6.5-inch wrists. That may be it. The Omega is a 39mm watch, and as we go on to find out, it should be obvious really just off of the Explorer, right? The Explorer doesn't seem to me, in respect to your collection, to be what the Explorer is for most. For most collectors, for most people, the Explorer is the perfect small sports watch. It's the smallest sports watch in their collection. It is as small as they would ever go, and they almost can't believe they go that far. And many people, for many, it's a great watch that they would love to get, but it's just too small. It's just too small. It's just too small. 36 millimeters is just too small, right? Plus, the Explorer doesn't have the big bezel. The Explorer doesn't have the fatter case, right? The Submariners and GMTs, by every measure, are larger, right? They're not even close. Even the crystals, right, were smaller and domed, whereas those Submariners were these larger, thicker, crystals. Everything about the Explorers is smaller. Whereas it seems to me that the Explorer to you is probably absolutely perfect, and you could probably even go smaller and be comfortable. But the Explorer is perfect. So it doesn't. What it tells me is that because a 39 millimeter watch, by the way, is generally not, for too many people, considered too large. If 39 is too big, then you definitely skew small. I work very hard to get people into 39 millimeters, right? There are I know so many collectors that are into 40s and 40 and up, whereas an older Submariner would be a jump for them so far as watch size, right? That would be a small watch, right? Think about it. If you're used to wearing a modern super case Submariner, a slightly older sub, a 14060, is going to feel really small because it is objectively small. Our perspective on sports watch sizing and proportions really has changed, and it's funny because it's very misleading. I'm sure how many of you out there have thought about, how is it possible the Submariner is just as big diameter-wise? We're still at 40 millimeters, right? Or right there, depending on, different variation, but we're right there. Nothing really has changed on the piece of paper, but the experience of wearing it is totally different. There's a lot of kind of misleading measurement there, right? So anyway, it's interesting to note that watch is maybe too big on you, because that could be the only reason. This watch is so fabulous. I can't imagine another reason, apart from it just not feeling comfortable on your wrist. I can't imagine another reason why that watch wouldn't get wear. I can't imagine. Moving on to the next question. Are you open to precious metal? In theory, his answer, in theory, but can't see it fitting into my usual environment. I would wear white gold, though, to feel a little bit of heft on the wrist, but nothing too flashy. Very useful, totally understand. Ultimately, though, my brain is somewhere else, and that's not going to inform my recommendation, as you'll find a little bit later. What are your case size guardrails? He says 36 to 40, but most modern 40 feel too large. My previous GMT would be my limit. A neo vintage GMT feels much better on my wrist. Again, a GMT is a tricky, modern Rolex is a very tricky measurement, okay? Because they're just so good. There's so much allure to the brand. They're comfortable. There's a weight to wearing a Rolex. So they're not always the best measures, or they're not, your opinion about a modern Rolex is not always representative, or it's not always going to carry through to watches in general, because Rolex does tend to be, just because it's so special, does tend to blind us a little bit from some of our otherwise objections, like case size. I feel that same way. Go look in my collection. You're not really going to be finding 40 millimeter watches, but I have a GMT, right? It's one of those things. It's one of those things. Very similar to gold as well. A lot of people, I'm not one of them, but a lot of people don't want to wear gold. It would be nice to have a gold Rolex, though, right? Isn't that funny, right? I really do think this Rolex is often the exception to the rule. Exception to the rule. Okay, next piece. Next question. What's your budget for your next piece? His answer, $10,000 would be a limit. Usually, I find myself looking at Rolex 14060M or with a date. I'm also a past dive instructor and technical cave diver, so I identify with dive watches, but they often feel too big or misplaced in a way. A big diver watch on a desk diver, white collar worker, to me just looks funny. Would love a 1680 or, of course, a Pepsi. Totally, I am so aligned with and sensitive to your feelings here, Andreas. I think that is a very it's a very perceptive, introspective, sensitive approach, right? You're saying, I like them, but they just don't feel right. I think sometimes, because I feel that way about a lot of things. I can look at something and love it, and then I try it on myself, and I just feel uncomfortable wearing it. I can't always put my finger on why, right? And then I remember there are people out there, maybe even most people, that live their whole lives, never with that bar of, do I feel comfortable in this? Is this something that represents me? Am I comfortable? right? And asking yourself that question is certainly a privileged question, and coming from a place of luxury, right? I mean, I don't think that, my dad growing up in East New York was asking himself, do I feel comfortable in these polyester pants? I don't think that was a question. I think that they were just lucky to have pants. I think that was basically it, They were just lucky that a cockroach didn't crawl in their ear the night before. That's a true story, by the way. I had to go to the doctor and get it removed. So I understand that that's almost a prissy observation, but it's true nonetheless. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with, asking yourself, do I feel comfortable in this watch? Do I feel comfortable in this shirt? It could be great, and it could be your cup of tea, and I could even like it on you. But do I feel comfortable in it? I hear that a lot with Cartier tanks as well, right? People say, oh, I love a tank. I just don't feel comfortable. And my response always is, yeah, gotta just try it. Try it on for a day or 2 days. I'm telling you, your mind will begin to change. Your perspective changes. Anyway, I digress. Next, a question and answer here. Name a watch that you'd absolutely love to own, but think might be out of the reach of your allocated budget. You'll never guess the answer, Andreas's answer to this question. Everything that he's told us up to now would tell us that he'd be interested in a King Submariner or a Grail GMT. That naturally, right? We're talking about sports models. We're talking about active history. We're talking about Rolex professional catalog. And then once I'm talking about out of budget allocation, say anything. Say anything. What's the best one? Is it a 1680 to you? Is it an underline? Is it a big crown? Whatever you want. You know what he wrote here? This is a big surprise. A. Lange & Söhne 1, 38.5 millimeter black dial, or a JLC Master Ultra Thin Perpetual. Go figure. Didn't that take you by surprise? That makes almost no sense to me. Now, you know what that tells me? That tells me that these questions that I've asked clearly are not, or have up until this point, not been thorough enough, because I really shouldn't be surprised by the last question. Or maybe my ordering is off, right? Now, I'm delighted by this answer because it shows me that while Andreas is very passionate about his sports watch collection, he's also open to the world out there, right? He's open to what other sorts of watches may be out there to enjoy and collect, have, to make space for in his collection. I'm a big advocate of having one great dress watch that you love. I am. I know that not everyone is open to a dress watch. I know it's a lot of money for something that you don't feel like you're going to wear very often, but I am just so passionate about traditional, fine, elegant mechanical watchmaking. I'm so passionate about it that I can't help but to be an advocate to everyone, even if it's falling on deaf ears. I just love it so much, right? So this is an answer that really made me happy, and it did naturally inform my recommendation. So here's my recommendation process. Here's where my brain went in the process of reading Andreas's email. First, independence. Clearly owning a Habring, and you say you wear it a ton, right? Owning a Habring says a lot about you. These are not cheap watches. These are several $1,000s. You own a really good one too. And not many people, not most people clearly, are even open to allocating thousands of dollars on a brand that is not mainstream. I mean, think about it. People spend thousands of dollars on worthless items, luxury items, all the time, just because of that history or, I think, brand power. A lot of that comes from a place of insecurity, right? A lack of logic. It's these brands preying on the emotions of people, right? My brand represents something. The product may be shit. It may fray. It may, peel. It may not be good. Your customer service may be shit, but you always wanted to have those LVs, right, on your arm, right? That it is true. It is true. The power of brand is amazing. So the people that are out there that are open to ignoring that or going beyond it, that's not to say that they can't own a Rolex. Rolex is, such a symbol, God knows, right? But being open to independent does make me say, okay, you're a different kind of watch collector, and I should encourage that independent spirit, because it's good. It's good for you. It's good for the community. It's good for independent watchmakers, right? You become a bit of an evangelist for it. It's good, right? You need depth, right? So then I start to say, okay, well, what independent brand would I recommend? My first thought was, of course, well, is there another Habring that I think that you would love? And I think that judging off of your Grail watches that maybe out of your budget allocation, that Lange 1 38.5 millimeter and the JLC Perpetual, the Habring Oscar is an amazing watch, absolutely beautiful, right? Moon phase and everything, 38.5 millimeters, I believe, pointer date, beautiful bracelet even, although of course you can go on a black alligator strap. The dial's great, Breguet numerals, alpha hands. You're not going to, or leaf hands. You're not going to get much better than that watch. Beautiful, fair price point, great watch. Then and everyone here should know about that watch. It's a fabulous watch. The next thought I had was, well, you already own one from Habring, so what else can you get? By the way, I fear that I'm mispronouncing Habring and it's Habring, but I'm not going to change at this point because I'd make a fool out of myself. Because then I'd just be, I'd rather be consistent at this point. If I'm wrong, please comment down below. I think, okay, what other brands are there that I could encourage you to take a look at? And one brand that had been sent to me a couple of months ago was a brand called Garrick. It's an English watchmaker that takes, I believe, ETA movements, but everything about this watch, about these watches, from dial, hands, and movement, is so well finished. That's really the drawing. That's the pull. Okay. The problem is these watches are 41 millimeters. Now, that's a problem for you, Andreas. You can't get this watch. You'll never wear it. It's a stupid waste of your money. It's a stupid waste of your $6,000. But for many people out there, these episodes aren't just for you. Episodes are for everybody. If you're the sort of person looking for a dress watch, but just open to going independent, but just can't wear a 36, 37, 38 millimeter watch, take a look at these pieces. They're absolutely fabulous. 41 millimeters. I want this to be a service to everybody, not just Andreas and I in our dialogue, right? So the watch that I ended up really thinking about here was, and again, I may mispronounce this, L-A-I-N-E, Line, I don't know, is the V38 model. This is a beautiful watch, a fairly mainstream independent so far as independents are concerned, still unknown to the world, but the watches are absolutely fabulous. The customization options for these watches, fabulous. Swiss watchmaker, 3-month lead time with a deposit of about $3,000. About $10,000 watch, that's true, but I'm telling you, the level of finishing that you're going to get at $10,000 from this brand is dollar for dollar. It blows away any of the major brands from the big conglomerates like Richemont or Swatch Group that you're going to really get. Now, that's not a diss to, a brand like Omega. Omega's watches are finished really well. The technology there is really amazing. It's great, but there's something different about that more hand artistic approach. These watches are absolutely terrific. Again, $10,000 is a lot of money for independent, but I'd really recommend you take a look at these guys. And I believe 38 millimeters in size. I think this would work. Obviously, I know that you would prefer probably 37, but I think that these would really work. They're beautiful. I love it. The blue dial, but I really love it. The pink. I've actually looked at these watches for myself before, believe it or not. And I'm not a big independent guy. But the next recommendation that I'll say here before I get to where these roads really diverge, I'll recommend you a sports watch that I think just represents a ton of value. I'm going to recommend you a sports watch that I think is super underappreciated, that you can get well within your budget, somewhere between $6,800 and $9,000, depending on the variation and depending on. I think if you go. And there are too many SKUs, so you need to be careful with taste, right? And I don't think they're all equal, but the Zenith Chronomaster, I think original or revival are essentially flawless watches. 37 in the revival, 38 in the original. I think they'll fit you incredibly well. The revival, it's the smaller one, so it may be even really perfect for you. I understand that it may not be your color profile. I know that you generally are going more, more flatter, right? But these watches are just so fabulous. And the original has a beautiful black tone, black white. I think it's really within your wheelhouse. The cases, the movements, everything about these watches over delivers. They actually trade, I believe, under retail, which is part of the reason why they're kind of a no-brainer, right, value prop. I really couldn't recommend them enough. That's a really informed recommendation, right? But that doesn't mean that it's going to hit that note in your heart, right? The way that what you clearly have talked about, which is Rolex. And even though I'm trying to make really interesting, different recommendations for you. I do know that at the end of the day, sometimes the most mass-produced, plain Jane, unspecial, meaning not a rare variation, not an error, not a limited run, not a project, just a basic, boring Rolex, sometimes is just the best. And I get it. I get that you may ultimately opt for a somewhat neo-vintage GMT, a 16710 or something like that. You can get them around $11,000, $12,000, a little bit less, probably. I bet you can even find one fluttering around $10,000. Just be careful with condition. You don't need to get box and papers. Just get a quality watch. Now, on a funding level, you can obviously just buy it. It's essentially within your allocated budget parameters. But it also would fulfill it could take the place of your modern Explorer. It could. You have your vintage Explorer. It's a super special watch. They're beautiful. Do you need 2 Explorers? That's a good question. Well, no one needs anything. You know what I mean when I say need. Would you be happier with the GMT, right? If it meant, even though it meant getting rid of the other Explorer? It's a good question. I'm not saying I have to answer that question. Only you do. Only you can. But it is a question I'd ask myself. Even if you can afford to keep both, or meaning not afford, but even if you're willing to allocate the resources for both, the matter of affording is a separate conversation altogether. It's none of anyone's business, right? But even if you allocate for both, will that make you happier? Will it make you happier to have both? Because the answer isn't always yes, right? We assume in the watch community it's always just, oh yeah, if you could do it, you could do it. Just keep amassing. Well, maybe you'd be happy with a lighter collection, a leaner collection, or a more focused collection. It's possible. It's really possible. It depends on who you are as a person, right? I mean, when I decide to sell a watch, I actually love it. I'm happy. I feel like, oh, wow, I was neglecting that. It was unnecessary for me to have it, and it's adult that I'm letting it go. I'm not saying that's your case. I'm just saying that could theoretically be. So, 2 roads have diverged into a wood. Will you take the one less traveled? Will you go independent? Will you go smaller brand? Will you go with hand finishing? Will you go with an elegant watch that is within that world of formality that you have just talked about before, outside the budget allocations, right? That JLC Perpetual, which is a great watch, the Langa, right, which is a little bit thicker, obviously, but still dress watches. Will you stay within that world of dress watches? Or will you take the road more traveled, right, and go with a Rolex, go with a boring old GMT? And if you do, even though I don't think you should, if you do, I don't blame you. We've all done it. I'll do it again, right? There's something so alluring about the comfort. I don't think that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have both Rolexes, meaning both modern neo-vintage Rolexes. I do think you should consider selling your Explorer, but there is something so alluring about it. No matter how cliche it is. That's what this channel's been about often, right? Opening our eyes to other things, new things, interesting things, but being realistic enough and honest enough with ourselves to say, just because you know that you should get something more interesting, there is something so beautiful about the allure, or something so powerful about the allure of even a simple Rolex. So I get it. But let me know what you do, Andreas. I hope you have a beautiful Christmas, a Merry Christmas. That's it. Thank you all for watching. Hope that you're all having a holly jolly season. And submit your collections for review if you'd like. Just copy those questions from the link up top. And that's it. Send over some photos, and I'm looking forward to it. Take care, everybody.